Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our breakout session on nature-based solutions. My name is Dave Pine. I'm the current president of the Board of Supervisors in San Mateo County and represent District 1, where we're sitting right now. I'm honored to be here today with our four panelists. We have Ariel Trabowski, from the director of San Bruno Mountain Watch, Diana Fu, environmental planner, San Francisco Estuary Partnership, Kellex Nelson from the San Mateo Resource Conservation District, and Barbara Camacho Garcia, who's the project lead at Grassroot Ecology. So nature-based solutions is a term that's been used for a long time now. And in essence, it's the idea is that you try to work with nature to mitigate and adapt to climate change, as opposed to pursuing highly engineered designs. Now, one common example that I often cite is the work in San Francisco Bay to restore former salt ponds into tidal marshlands. One of the really exciting projects is the South Bay, the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, which aims to restore up to 15,000 acres of former salt ponds. Salt ponds, it turns out, are just incredibly remarkable for the ecosystem. They trap pollutants, they improve water quality, and they can serve as natural flood protection. So it's an excellent example of a nature-based solution. But nature-based solutions can be much smaller scale. They can be as simple as replacing your lawn with your grass lawn with native plants. So nature-based solutions are a very important tool to help keep habitats healthy. They can sequester carbon, they can improve air and water quality. And these things are particularly important in disadvantaged communities where industrial pollutants are very, very prevalent. So personally, I've been working on nature-based solutions for some time now as chair of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. The Restoration Authority is funded by Measure AA, which was a historic 20-year parcel tax passed across the 9-county Bay Area. It raises $12 per parcel, or $25 million per year, $500 million over the life of its tenure. So through this funding source, the Restoration Authority can fund projects to enhance the bay, projects that focus on flood protection if they have a conservation element, and various public amenities and bay access. So perhaps today Measure A will come up as an opportunity for some of our projects. It is focused on the bay, not on the coastal parts of our area. So now let's turn to our panelists. This first question will be we'll spend the most time, where I'd like to have each of our panelists just briefly introduce themselves and talk about how they are incorporating nature-based solutions into their work. So I'd like to call the panelists in this order. We'll start with Kellex, then Ariel, then Diana, and then Barbara. So we'll start off with you, Kellex.
Okay. Is this working? Yes, I can hear it. If whoever is advancing the slides would kindly advance to thank you. So the Resource Conservation District, or RCD, in San Mateo County is this unique form of local government that's a local hub for community-led conservation across jurisdictions, across public and private lands to address community needs. And so in this photo, what you're seeing is that the impacts of climate change, of course, are happening now, which we know. We're seeing in San Mateo County historic fires, back-to-back atmospheric rivers and flooding. This photo is of the community of Pescadero on the coast. It's one example of where we're doing this work. And you can see the flooding impacts to the town, to the farms, to the homes. And next slide, please. The main road to town is, in this photo you can see, is underwater. It's basically the only access and egress to town. It's cutting people off from emergency response, jobs, economic development, etc. Next slide, please. And of course, homes. Lots of homes impacted, ability to get to school, etc. Next slide. I just want to point out in this photo that you see there's no rain. Do you see that the sky is clear? That's because the chronic flooding in this area was actually not from excessive water, the chronic flooding. It's because the ecosystem in this broader area was damaged. accelerating erosion, filling the creeks with sediment so that the water had no place to go. The water jumped the banks and went to places that were more destructive by filling the creeks with that sediment. So the next slide. Most of our solutions to flooding focus on restoring creeks. A lot of our solutions to flooding or climate impacts are not actually necessarily even in the places where you see the impacts themselves. So when we restore these creeks, they hold water and they also store sediment the way that nature designed for them to do in a very dynamic system. And this not only protects the community, but next slide, please. I just want to put a shout out to the wildlife that are also they're also threatened by climate change. These are critters that are facing extinction in San Mateo County, threatened and endangered species, and they're also needing to adapt to climate change. Next slide. So some of our nature-based solutions are ones that are very familiar to all of you, like the kind of work that we do to restore the health of forests so that they can sequester carbon, be more resilient to wildfire, and also protect biodiversity. Next slide. Wetlands are also massive sinks for greenhouse gases. Restoring these habitats, protecting these habitats can help mitigate climate change. We do a lot of habitat restoration in these places. But less well known, next slide please, is the potential for agriculture to mitigate climate change. And I want to give a big shout out right now to the potential for working lands in San Mateo County, not only to help with food security, but also mitigate climate change. So the next, that's it. So we help farmers and ranchers work with nature to take carbon out of the atmosphere where it's destructive and store it in healthy soils and vegetation where it's beneficial. So that map that you see at the bottom is an example of a carbon farm plan we did for Tomcat Ranch in Pescadero. Many more examples. If you want to go visit our table, we have examples of actual carbon farm plans, what they look like. The potential for carbon sequestration on agricultural lands in San Mateo County alone is equal to removing the emissions from 708 million miles of cars driven, or equivalent to mitigating from the emissions for electricity to 51,000 homes in San Mateo County. Soil health is literally the solution that's under our feet. It is absolutely extraordinary. And so last slide, please. If you put all these things together, from the top to the bottom of these watersheds, basically it equates to resilience, to water security, to cleaner air, to wildfire resiliency, food security, and reduced natural disasters. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Ariel, if you could go next.
Hi everyone, my name is Ariel and I've been working on San Bruno Mountain for the past 8 years. Our organization, San Bruno Mountain Watch, we help the public explore San Bruno Mountain's history and environment and work with local communities to restore its native habitats and also cultivate its native flora at our Mission Blue Nursery. Today I'm here to talk about Colma Creek. Colma Creek is an environment that starts on San Bruno Mountain, makes its way down through Daly City, Colma, and South City till it reaches the bay. And on the mountain, it is a very lush and beautiful creek, as you can see here. But when it reaches the city, it becomes much more of a cold, concrete creek behind bars, behind chain link fences, behind canals. I kind of think of it as the Los Angeles River of San Mateo County. And it's a place that reaches the bay eventually, and in a very transformed state. One example is the salt marsh mouth of Colma Creek. You can see here in the blue area, that's the historic salt marsh at the mouth of the creek, and keep an eye on that yellow star. Over time, over the past 70 years, the creek was slowly filled and turned into an industrial and warehousing area. And you can see actually that yellow star is where we are today. The location of this conference center, is on the historic body of Colma Creek and this salt marsh. It's within this census tract that is one of the most burdened by pollution in the whole state of California. Residents in this tract are majority people of color, and Colma Creek is a body of water that's listed as an impaired body of water under the Federal Clean Water Act, and so it needs a lot of help. In 2017, there was a project from the Resilient by Design Bay Area Challenge that thought to transform a lot of different waterways around the bay, and Colma Creek was one of them. The Resilient South City project, led by Hassel, was a great effort. We were a community partner to that, leading high schools on field trips to the mountain and to Colma Creek to explore it and to help think about how the creek on the mountain, the plants on the mountain, could help restore the creek in the city. Following that, there were adaptation planning that Hassel continued to carry out, and these are two examples of their vision for nature-based solution to turn the creek into a much more vibrant, beautiful, and accessible place that also is prepared for sea level rise and flooding. We continue to be involved in working with the community on this project. With Hassel and other community partners like Rise South City, we lead field trips, for example, for high schools. I have one tomorrow and one Friday to the Colma Creek shoreline where students can learn about this project and take action now to restore the creek in small ways while we wait for the bigger construction to happen. So things like removing waste, removing invasive plants, planting native plants. And here are some examples of the plants that have gone out to these little test nursery sites on the waterfront that model how native plants from San Bruno Mountain could go in the upland areas where historic grasslands, for example, once were by the bay, and also salt marsh plants in the transition zone that can replace the ice plant and fennel that is there now.
Thank you, Ariel. Very impressive. Diana.
Hello. Hello? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Fu. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm with the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. Just a little bit about the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, or SFEP. A lot of people are confused about what we do and confuse us with our sister organization, the Estuary Institute. So I'm here to say today that we are not the Estuary Institute Partnership. We promote efficient partnerships to drive successful regional resiliency efforts. We leverage federal funds to build capacity of local partners, which I'll talk more about later, to innovate multi-benefit solutions, pass through funds. We support community-led vision plans and assessments that are rooted in environmental justice, health, and climate resilience. And we also advance nature-based solutions and green shoreline protection strategies, along with protecting water quality and public health. And the map that you see here on the right is a map of our planning area, and you can actually see how big that is. Most people who are out here on the peninsula may not know that the bay is actually connected to the delta, which is connected to the Sierra Nevadas. So it's all an interconnected watershed, and it is quite the job to manage it and restore it and protect it. Next slide, please. Today I want to talk a little bit more about a project that's come a long way, the Palo Alto Horizontal Levee Project. For those of you who don't know what a horizontal levee is, it is basically an alternative to traditional gray shorelines like riprap. It uses a gently sloping and vegetated ecotone slope to provide multi-benefits, including wave attenuation, providing habitat for wildlife, enhancement of transitional habitat between tidal wetlands and terrestrial uplands. It helps communities adapt to sea level rise, and it also provides polishing of treated wastewater. In that slide there, you'll also see that the treated wastewater polishing, for those of you who are interested on the emerging science of horizontal levees, you can go check out the Ora Loma horizontal levee, which is located in San Lorenzo, just right across the bay. And we've been partners with folks over at UC Berkeley with David Sedlak's lab in trying to investigate kind of the efficacy of horizontal levees at removing contaminants from waterways. Next slide, please. But more specifically about the Palo Alto Horizontal Levee Project, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we've gotten to where we are. The preliminary designs were funded by grants from the US EPA Climate Ready Estuaries Program, the California Coastal Conservancy, and also the City of Palo Alto. It helps a lot to have a local champion, and in this case it was a city engineer who really wanted to advance the next generation of shorelines in our region, and was willing to use Palo Alto as the test case. I'm happy to announce that construction of the Palo Alto horizontal levee will begin in spring 2024, and we are hoping to scale horizontal levees regionally across the bay's shorelines in Fairfield, Suisun, and Hayward as well. My specific role with the Palo Alto horizontal levee is leading a community-based microplastics research project with Nuestra Casa, who are partners with us on this project, as well as CSU Channel Islands, who have a great science program dedicated to community-based research.
Thank you. We hear a lot about horizontal levees, so it's great to hear about a project that's actually coming out of the ground. Okay, and then our final speaker is Barbara.
Hi everyone, my name is Barbara. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the project lead at Grassroots Ecology. We are a local nonprofit. We do habitat restoration, but our main goal is really just to connect people to their local ecosystems and educate and engage them to restore their local parks. So that's kind of how I got involved with Grassroots Ecology. I'm part of the East Palo Alto team. You can see the pictures there of Cooley Landing and Ravenswood. And just by a show of hands, how many of you have been to these parks? Okay, a good amount, great, good to see. I know there's been a lot of history today just talking about all of the legacy of East Palo Alto, and I'm excited to talk about the future now. And the two parks that I work at are Salt Marsh Habitat. You can see the tides coming in on the last picture. Sorry. And they help to protect a lot of the endangered species there, including the Ridgeways rail and the salt marsh harvest mouse. And as Supervisor Pine mentioned, the importance of using wetland restoration, conversion from the salt ponds to really help with the flood limitations and helping to mitigate some of those flood impacts, as well as a mitigation strategy in sequestering carbon, because wetlands sequester a lot of carbon. Next slide. So getting into some of the legacy of East Palo Alto, there's a long history of redlining and systematically excluding people from Palo Alto. So a lot of the history here echoes so many communities around the world of low income and communities of color, which is that of degradation. So you can see there's a picture there of the county dump. So Cooley Landing was a dump for about 30 years. On that top right picture, you can even kind of see the salt pond of Ravenswood. And you can see the open pile burning and all of the human impacts that this land has faced. A lot of the community came together and really championed the city to convert this into an open space, being like the first open space that the city of East Palo Alto opened to the people to enjoy and recreate in. Next slide. And now what we're doing with our project here at Ravenswood is really engaging the community outside, helping them restore it by planting native plants and removing invasive species, removing plants to make way for more biodiversity, especially along the upper transition zone of the marsh. And we engage a lot of community members, from kids to local groups and local churches as well, and really getting them out to get their hands in the soil, like literally, and get to know the land. Next slide. Another part of, and then you can see the pictures there of before and after. We just started this planting last winter, and that's after a year delay in trying to get permits to even get this project started. But you can see there, within just 1 year of planting, we installed 400 plants. We have 1,000 more this winter that we're going to install. But you can see just how impactful that work is. You can see a lot of the gum plant, which is the yellow flowery one that provides a lot of habitat to the Ridgeways rail. Next slide. And as another way that we're really trying to go beyond just the restoration of the project and go into community engagement, the second part of this is workforce development. So having interns that we can create a path into this career, as well as really funnel the money to community-led organizations to have a leadership role within the community and lead the types of events that they want to see. So we heard a lot about CRC today, and they're one of our main projects, our partners for this project. And with them, we're able to really funnel this money into organizations like Anamatangi Polynesian Voices, St. Mark's, and El Comité de Vecinos del Lado Oeste. So that's really how we're really engaging the community outside. And going beyond like just work, we also are doing a lot of community events, such as like Dia de los Muertos. We hosted a King Tide Walk, which you can see pictures there. Dia de los Muertos, we have a watercoloring day, and ultimately like celebrating joy outside. So going beyond that to like really cultivate community in this space that has long been neglected. That's all.
Well, thank you all for your descriptions of your work, and gives the audience a real sense of the breadth of nature-based solutions and the importance of that approach. So let's talk about some of the barriers to nature-based solutions. I know that the regulatory aspects come up despite the fact that it's not a hard gray infrastructure, but nonetheless there are sometimes regulatory challenges. And maybe Kelix, could you kick us off in talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Is this working? Test, test? Trade you. Thanks. I'll trade you back in a minute. Yeah, so it has been a source of amazement to me in my career protecting natural resources that the single greatest barrier I face are the regulations intended to protect natural resources. And sometimes to do a habitat restoration project, it can take 7 to 9 local, state, and federal permits that can take years to get, and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Really focused on what the impacts might be during the 3 to 6 weeks that you're doing a project, as opposed to what the impacts are of not doing the project. There's been some very, very significant strides. The state has something called the Cutting Green Tape Initiative that's focused on reducing regulatory barriers to restoration. There are a few different federal efforts having to do with endangered species protection if the project is restoring habitat. I encourage people to look that up. I see some very significant strides. There was a recent exemption in CEQA for projects that are habitat restoration, so that you can accelerate getting them done more quickly and less costly, because the reality is that right now the risk of doing these projects is arguably lower than the risk of not doing these projects. And so there's a lot of focus on trying to get them done at the pace and scale that's needed.
Thank you, Kelix. Have the other panelists experienced regulatory issues that they'd want to share? Or? Okay, let's talk a little bit then about how your organizations incorporate justice, equity, and inclusion within your work, and how your organizations partner with communities and prioritize interventions for those at risk. Barbara, do you want to kick us off on that?
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned a lot of the components of the project, but a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff that we really try to be intentional about this project includes even how we hire, going from our workforce development side, hiring interns. We really try to prioritize the outreach for this within the community, from removing the need of a cover letter or a resume and moving to a Google survey that they can fill out. We're able to reach a lot more of those barriers that people might face getting into this career. With the community engagement side, we've been doing a lot to work with communities and paying them for their expertise and paying them to lead these, because a lot of our events fill up really quickly, and most of the times it's the people who have the privilege to volunteer. So we're working to really reduce those barriers by making all of the information accessible, reserving spots that we specifically target outreach to for local schools and local groups that they can then register for them. And ultimately, get more of the community outside, offering different types of event, having staff that can speak Spanish and relate to the issues that are going on in the community. And also, encourage hiring not just at the field staff level, but within our organization, within leadership and the board. So these are all very tangible ways that my organization has really worked to advance equity and reduce the barriers of people in this space that is majority white.
Thank you. Do you have some thoughts on that, Ariel?
Yeah, in the context of San Bruno Mountain Watch, the lack of access to parks was the founding reason for the rise of the movement to save San Bruno Mountain in 1971. And at that time, the mountain was all privately owned, and it was planned to be developed into a massive new city, and part of it was planned to be cut down and dumped in the bay as bayfill. And so people in North County and South City formed this committee to make the mountain their park. They were folks from cities like South City, Brisbane, Colma, Daly City, working class folks who didn't have access to parks in the same way that more wealthy residents of San Mateo County in the South might have had. And so that value is still within our organization. We see, in the context of the project Colma Creek, we see that it's in a sense an extension of that movement to remove access to local parks. Colma Creek being an extension of San Bruno Mountain, we kind of feel that it's a part of the mountain that is behind fences and barriers, and so the proposals to actually tear down those fences and break up the concrete is really exciting for us, to get people in the local area to be able to actually go down by the water and touch it and reconnect with it, connections that they've had historically, but that these flood control barriers have come in the way of. And so with that too, valuing the importance of community involvement and the power of grassroots people, the people who got involved to save the mountain have now allowed this opportunity for the mountain to now have a role in helping improve the creek, taking the native plants from the mountain down the watershed and reestablishing the people and the plants along the banks of the water. And so we always think of ways of having community-based restoration be involved in any project, even in this one that would eventually involve a lot of large-scale construction and heavy equipment. We want to facilitate activities that people can participate in, whether it's helping collect and grow the seeds for the native plants that'll be planted, or just doing small-scale restoration now at the shoreline. We want the communities that live along this creek to be part of this project and help shape it.
Great. Diana or Kellex, anything to?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit just about the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. As a relatively new civil servant, I will say that, SFEP, like many regional, local, federal government institutions, have a long way to go in terms of advancing justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. But I would also say not to let that stop you if you work in government. I feel like a lot of times people feel like they have to do something perfectly the first time, and that is just so impossible. And part of it should be a learning process, right? I will say that at least at SFEP, we've adopted the kind of mindset that you start anywhere and you go everywhere. And that means just being really opportunistic with funding that we go after, and then kind of, I would say, building the plane as we fly it, but also now with the injection of bipartisan infrastructure law funding, we have dedicated pots of funding to really operationalize our equity program, which I'm very excited about. More specifically with the Palo Alto Horizontal Levee, one of the aspects of the project that I'm working on that I mentioned earlier with the community-based microplastics monitoring. Microplastics are, I'm sure as many of you know, are all over the place. Chances are we're filled with microplastics right now. The health implications of this contaminant of emerging concern is still very much being studied, and it's quite frankly, like, we don't know what having microplastics in our air and our water means. But what we do know is that, like many other issues, once there's an environmental contaminant, it will first and foremost, and possibly most seriously, damage the health and lives of those living in disadvantaged or underserved communities. That much we know for sure. So when we were writing, a funding proposal for the Palo Alto Horizontal Levee, there's always this aspect of community engagement. And we thought about it. I feel like community engagement is oftentimes a checkbox. But we thought about it in conjunction with our partners at Nuestra Casa, who we already had a pre-existing relationship with through the Disadvantaged Communities and Tribal Involvement Program. We were able to really leverage that trust we had built through a previous grant and really talk about how do we involve community members from the beginning of this Palo Alto Horizontal Levee. although the designs and kind of the advocacy for the construction of this levee was started by a local champion, now that it was coming to fruition, we weren't sure up until that point if it was just going to be designed sitting on a shelf, right? Now that it's becoming a reality, how can we involve community members from the very beginning before the levee is even constructed? And that was, in discussion with Nuestra Casa, and there were conversations about involving members of their Environmental Justice Academy and, getting trained to collect samples of soil and water at the project site, learning how to process those samples, and also having data sovereignty over the microplastics data that we were going to collect.
So conservation districts were created in law as this special form of government that not only helps people help the land, but helps people by helping the land. And we were designed to be community-led conservation, which is part of the reason that we do so much work on private as well as public lands. So that community component is in our DNA. But then there's an additional equity lens on a lot of this work, and you all saw the photos of the flooding, and it turns out with the fires and with the flooding, the people who were particularly impacted were people who couldn't pick up and go to another home, or who couldn't work remotely because they work on those fields that were flooded, and or don't have cars and that sort of thing. So these solutions the problem is disproportionately affecting those who are most vulnerable, and the solutions will disproportionately benefit then, hopefully, the people who have been so harmed. And then in addition to that, some of the work that we're focused on also right now is we have partnerships with indigenous organizations and individuals like the Amamutsun Tribal Band and the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, people who were violently displaced from the lands that we're currently living in and working in. And so we're doing a lot to try to help these entities build the capacity to practice contemporary indigenous stewardship, not just talk about what they used to do, but make sure that they can continue to do it.
All right. Appreciate your perspectives on that. And one final question, and I always have to ask about funding and the challenges you face when you're thinking about funding nature-based solutions. So who'd like to kick us off on that one?
I'm not sure if I'm the person to talk about funding. Yes, I was going to talk. Thank you. I think the point that I wanted to bring up with funding for nature-based solutions, I feel like we're still very much in this innovation and experimental phase, trying to see kind of like the real efficacy of nature-based solutions to do what theoretically we say they're going to do. However, that experiment and that innovation, they cost money. And I think for a long time, and I think still now, governments tend to be a little gun shy. We tend to be very risk averse, but I don't think there's time now for us to kind of sit on the sidelines and wait for the private sector or someone else to prove it. I think the public sector has a very big role in advancing, the research of nature-based solutions as well as the implementation of them regionally. So I'll leave that there.
So the good news is that there's a lot of funding right now to do a lot of this work. Locally, with the AA funds, there's a lot of funding in the state, there's a lot of federal funding. There's a couple of challenges about that funding that I want to invite our elected officials and others to be part of the solutions to. One is that voters, legislators, et cetera, want certainty with their investments. And so they want transparency, accountability, and outcomes. The way that tends to trickle down is that they'll typically really only pay for infrastructure-related projects, implementation of something that's built. So what about all the collaborative capacity that's needed? What about the relationships that need to be built? What about innovation? What about trying new things? What about when we have to try something that might fail, but you're accountable? And so I think that there's some work ahead of us for how these funds can be right-fitting for some of the real work that hasn't been recognized as real work in the past.
Great perspective.
And I could also briefly talk about funding from like the nonprofit perspective. A lot of this work that we're able to do is because of Measure A funding and voters who support these policies. But there's a lot of the innovation that I think being a nonprofit we're able to be nimble because of philanthropy and a lot of the donation-based work that we're able to do and have more like freedom to spend it how we want, which is really important in like supporting a lot of the equity work that we do as well as like the collaboration and capacity building. So I think in terms of a nonprofit, just like leveraging different funds for the projects that you want to do is really important.
Great, thank you. So that wraps up our questions this afternoon for the panelists. If everyone could give them a big round of applause, I'd appreciate that.